What is the role of government in human trafficking? It should be only one that works to stop it. But today I have an interview with a whistleblower that exposed the dark side of how, even in North America, that isn't always the case.
So a DHS whistleblower named Aaron Stevenson came forward. He actually lost his job for revealing that members of transnational organized crime networks like MS-13, 18th Street Gang, Russian Balkan crime syndicates were getting the kids. And he came forward in August of 21, which alerted us. So we alerted everyone on the site. And in less than 2 weeks, we found the first case of MS-13.
In the summer of 2021, I came across evidence that there are children being sponsored by transnational organized criminals, and this was being completely overlooked by the US government.
Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, an outlet I'm proud to say doesn't back down from bringing you important reports that aren't adequately covered by State Choice News. And one such report or topic is that of human trafficking. And while we don't have as much cross-country data as I'd like to see in Canada, we do have enough data to show that such slavery is on the rise across North America. A group that is especially vulnerable to being trafficked is a rapidly growing demographic in Canada and the US, and that is those who migrate to the countries. Like the 64 Mexican migrants who were lured to Canada for a better life, but in turn were discovered by North Toronto police earlier this year, living in deplorable bug-infested rooms, subjected to abuse, and many sexually assaulted. Today, I bring you an important interview with someone who knows all too well about how migrants can be a target for human traffickers. Tara Rodas, the Department of Health and Human Services whistleblower, became a hero last year after a Project Veritas report showed her exposing what she calls government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
The tax dollars of people who are listening are paying to put children in the hands of criminals. I said, I need to make you aware. And they said, Tara, we don't get sued by traffickers.
And Rodas hasn't stopped sounding an alarm of concern over an estimated 85,000 migrant children that have gone missing under the Biden administration since. Here she is.
So I've been a federal employee for more than 20 years. And 17 of those years have been in the Inspector General community, which looks for fraud, waste, and abuse in government programs. But in 2021, and today I'm talking to you about my experience with HHS, so not in my official capacity, just in my personal capacity and my experience at HHS. So at the beginning of 2021, the Biden administration put out a nationwide call to all federal employees. And they said, if you work for the federal government, we need you because you're vetted, you're safe to work around kids. We need you all to leave your agencies and deploy to the southern border to help process children. We want you to help place children with sponsors here in the United States. When I saw the announcement, it talked about reuniting children with their families. So I thought this was a family reunification program. My husband is from El Salvador, so I'm a Spanish speaker. And I thought, you know what, I need to go help this critical mission. No matter what anybody thinks about the border, the safety of children is not a political issue. This is a humanitarian issue. And so I absolutely volunteered and said, here I am, send me. And sadly, what I discovered is that these children are being recruited in home country. They're being smuggled to the US border. They're being handed over to the United States government, who finds them a sponsor in less than 30 days. Their goal was to move children in 10 to 15 days. And so there were no law enforcement people vetting. There were not people looking at the backgrounds of these sponsors. They were not going through any significant checks. As a matter of fact, people will be shocked because I was shocked. The case managers who have no law enforcement background are only, quote, vetting sponsors by looking at documents that the sponsor is sending to them to their phone via WhatsApp. So the sponsor is taking a photograph of a document, which is amazing.
Oh, man. This
So they never see the sponsor and they never see the sponsor's home. We literally then just fly the child to the sponsor or put them on a bus to the sponsor.
This is so shocking. And like yourself, many who are just watching some of the information about the children come across, they do think that it's about connecting the families together. Now, you got assigned to sort of a migrant emergency intake site of sorts. And take us back there to when you first started to see some suspicious activity. I think you call it suspicious sponsor activity. Tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, well, so we saw children in crisis. So children screaming for their parents, children having panic attacks. But that very first case of suspicious sponsor, because again, I didn't know there was trafficking in the program for more than a decade.
Why would you?
Had no idea. None of us had any idea. It was a brother and a sister who were in clear crisis, talking about how they had to be let out of there. They had to get to the sponsor. The younger brother, he ended up in a psych ward. I mean, he was suicidal. He was so stressed out. Mm-hmm. And when we were wondering, well, if this is family reunification, and remember, this is less than 3 weeks into working in case management. Mm-hmm. If this is family reunification, why is there so much crisis? Why can the children not tell us a story that matches the story of the sponsor? Yeah. And the sponsor sends in paperwork and also sends in a photocopy of an ID, but they don't match. Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So me and another federal partner, she was looking through cases. She was trying to figure out what was happening. I was looking at stuff. And the two case managers, so there were 4 of us looking at this going, something is dreadfully wrong.
Right.
And that's when, we discovered that this one person who was a household member, she then sent us another ID, and he had sponsored at other locations. And so we discovered that over a period of time that they had over 18 children that they had collected from multiple sites. And this was undetected by HHS. And there were many such instances that remain undetected. And so today, sadly, because they don't have proper people in the vetting process, there's no law enforcement looking at it. You don't have data analysts looking at the data. So hundreds of kids are going to the same address. Mm-hmm. There are places in Houston, Texas, where there are over, and this is all the way back in 2021, like more than 350 children in a 3 square mile. It's statistically improbable. It just doesn't make sense, that you only had at that point less than 100,000 children coming into the country, and you have this one area where all these children are. It just did not make sense.
This is absolutely horrific. Now, so the 4 of you mentioned 4 of you get onto this, you find these 18 kids have been sponsored by the same person's people. And there was some time between then to when you have to resort to becoming a whistleblower for media of sorts. So what were the next steps? Were you guys tackling this issue within? Was there any sort of caring from HHS? What happened after you started to find this suspicious sponsor activity and say something's terribly wrong here?
Yeah, so the first case, we thought that they were very interested. They appeared very interested. They said they were going to call some officials at DHS. But now we knew what the flags were, right? Red flags are if a sponsor is sponsoring multiple children, if there is an address that's been used multiple times. So now we knew what the red flags were. And so now we were seeing these cases everywhere. So by mid-July, even HHS put out a nationwide email. This was on July 23rd from HHS headquarters. They set up a new email address. It was called UAC Migration. And they wanted all these suspicious sponsor and potential trafficking cases to be sent to this email. So HHS was well aware they had a problem in July of 2021 because they were getting calls from everywhere. So at first, I thought they were doing something. You know, they said someone was going to be looking at all of this, but the more we reported, it just didn't seem like it was very well received. So at this point, by July, we're going not only up the chain of HHS, but we're starting to go to contacts who we know outside of the chain of command. And so one of my colleagues actually reached out to FBI. And then I, fortunately, by September, when we had discovered that there was literally gang activity, gangs were sponsoring the children. So a DHS whistleblower named Aaron Stevenson came forward. He actually lost his job for revealing that members of transnational organized crime networks like MS-13, 18th Street Gang, Russian Balkan crime syndicates were getting the kids. And he came forward in August of 21, which alerted us. So we alerted everyone on the site. And in less than 2 weeks, we found the first case of MS-13.
In the summer of 2021, I came across evidence that there are children being sponsored by transnational organized criminals, and this was being completely overlooked by the US government. The second time I came to Project Veritas, I did so publicly in October of 2021 to whistleblow about a rule change that was being proposed by the employee union and that was completely unknown to the American public.
Once I reported that case, which I believe was September 4, I was actually, by the 21st of September, I was accused of wrongdoing. I was walked off the site by the highest ranking person, so the federal field specialist, with security. I was threatened with investigation and my badge was taken, all because I was trying to save the children, save the kids.
Oh my goodness. And so I remember, when I was reading up on this situation, or I saw something about someone saying something to you about who the concern is really about when it comes to being sued on these types of matters. Can you explain that?
Oh yeah. So I still cannot believe that a federal employee at HHS, we're talking about dealing with children, would have this response to me. So we had already reached out to the oversight organization, which is HHS Office of Inspector General. We'd had conference calls specifically on this case in Austin, where we had over 109 kids on a 1 square block, 109 children. So we'd forwarded that case, and I'd alerted case managers to the bad addresses where these people were. And a case manager comes running up to me and says, "Tara, my child is going to Austin, to that place." I said, "What are you talking about?" So I thought it was an error. So I picked up my stuff. I go running down to the command center, and the attorney was there, who was my boss, not the federal field specialist. So I was kind of happy in a way because I thought, surely the attorney is going to understand. It's not a good idea to send a child to a place that we already have under investigation.
Wow.
This does not pass the common sense test. So I'm like, "Look, I work for you, but it's really important that you understand this is the situation." And she looked at me stone cold and she said, "Tara, we only get sued if we keep kids in care too long. We don't get sued by traffickers." And she leaned in. She said, "Are you clear? We don't get sued by traffickers." And that was the response of the United States government towards trafficking of children. And that was, I still, had I not heard it with my own ears, I couldn't believe it.
How evil. I bet you she didn't get walked out like you did, treated like some sort of criminal.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, when she was confronted by Project Veritas and James O'Keefe and asked about this, at the end of the second video that they did, when they actually were talking about how the children were forced to buy their Social Security cards and all of this stuff. So Project Veritas did 2 exposés on this. And her response was, "I don't recall saying that." And there have been other whistleblowers along the way too. So there have been a lot of people who've been trying to create that spark of action so that people will protect the children. Sadly, to this point, nothing has been done.
Wow.
Nothing, no laws have been passed. Nobody said we're holding all children in care, because they could just say, okay, that's it. We're not releasing one more child to a sponsor until we get a hold of the program.
And at least delay like the time and the process, change everything. So that's not happening. Have there been any political leaders that have taken an interest that are even trying to make change in this area?
So I will say, on a very positive note, they talked about a new piece of legislation called the Secure Act. And it's specifically designed to go after these 85,000 missing children. So just since 2021, 85,000 children minimum are gone. They have no contact with them. They cannot say where they are.
85,000.
And so this Secure Act is designed to help locate these children. And so Congressman Smith, who is out of New Jersey, he is one of the sponsors of the bill, and his hope is to get this passed. And his hope is to penalize both HHS and DHS if they're unable to give information on the kids. They're going to start penalizing them financially and taking away their budgets, which, just as from a project management perspective, of which I'm certified in, any failing project after 10 years, if you can't get your project right, and especially something with such high risk as vulnerable children, you deserve to be defunded, period. So HHS has proven that they lose 1/3 of the children. The last 3 years, 1/3 of the children have gone missing. Unacceptable. It's unacceptable. So I would encourage, people just to see what organizations are out there and try to get involved, because it's happening across all of our borders right now. And lots of children have gone missing.
Well, thank you so much for being on Rebel News.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for highlighting government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
This was an important report. Would you agree? If you do, perhaps you'd like to also support our independent journalism that keeps reports like this going strong. If you go to rebelnews.com and click on the donate button, throw in a few bucks, it helps us keep the lights on here and supports our journalism, which is completely independent of government interests. Again, that's rebelnews.com/donate. We appreciate your support.